Welcome to the Freedom Club Podcast, where we discover the fight for freedom, fulfillment, passion, and purpose. Your host is Kurt Mercadante, Gallup certified strengths coach, an agency founder who is dedicated to coaching individuals seeking to level up their life and their businesses. The Freedom Club is about unlocking your talents, turning them into strengths, and crushing your objectives. You can learn more at kurtmercadante.com. Welcome to the Freedom Club.
This is the Freedom Club Podcast. I'm your host, Kurt Mercadante. It is Thursday, May 3rd, which means it's time for our Thursday interview segment, in which I interview a business leader or some other all-around interesting person. We have just that today in Neil Hughes. I'll get to him in a minute. I hope you'll come back next Monday and every Monday after that, because every Monday is our Monday Motivator segment, a short burst of motivation to help you kick your week off on the right foot. Before we get started, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you if you're a subscriber. If you like what you're hearing today and in this episode, I ask you to subscribe. And no matter who you are, I'd like to ask you a favor. I'd like to ask you if you can help us to continue to grow. We are growing consistently each and every episode, and I'd like to ask you today, if you like this podcast, if you want to be part of our continued growth, please share this podcast with your friends, with your family members, with anyone who you think would benefit from hearing stories of people who have successfully fought for lives of freedom and fulfillment. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you so much for sharing this podcast and being part of our continued growth. Now, for today's episode, I'm really excited to bring you someone who I met a few months back. His name's Neil Hughes. He lives in Birmingham, UK. He has a very successful podcast. It's called Tech Blog Writer. He gets tens of thousands of listeners every single month. He does 6 episodes a week interviewing startup founders, the leaders in the tech industry from across the globe. He interviews them 6 times per week. I hope you'll check it out. He's also a very successful tech columnist, writes for Inc. magazine, writes for Next Web. He travels the world. He's also one of the most prolific and successful writers on LinkedIn. And without further delay, here is my interview with Neil Hughes. So Neil Hughes, welcome so much to the program. As we talked about offline, you are my very first guest from the UK. Welcome.
Cool, blimey, Governor. It's a pleasure to be here, my friend.
And I think I've told you this before, but I love listening to your podcast because of your accent and your voice, and you just have a very kind of calm, soothing way of speaking. It's so calm. And you know, I kind of go up and down, which makes it hard to edit my podcast sometimes because of the voice levels.
No, I do get carried away sometimes. Maybe I should be a negotiator rather than a podcast host, you know?
Well, I've been doing videos for a while on LinkedIn, and I had someone tell me, he said, when I watch your videos, I just can't look away. I don't know what it is. He said, I think you could either be a very successful infomercial salesman or a suicide cult leader. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, no, take that as a compliment. And I said, okay, maybe let me think about that for a little bit.
I love it. I know it's quite amusing because I'm from the UK. Obviously, you're over there in the US. A lot of people kind of assume everyone in the UK has really got a very posh accent, or my kind of accent. A lot of people think is Australian whenever I go to the US, which is
Really?
quite strange. But then I did have someone a few weeks ago said I sounded like Paul McCartney. Which amused me even more.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, the ultimate insult would saying you sound like Dick Van Dyke from Mary Poppins,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Because I know he was just on a talk show saying that he still gets hate mail from the accent that he used in the movie. So, but Neil, you are one of the creme de la creme of podcasters. Tech Blog Writer is your podcast, and you and I met a few months ago at a wonderful conference, no longer virtual. It was in Denver. You gave some great tips on podcasting, which I immediately implemented. So I owe you big time for that. But we're going to get into how you got into podcasting, your work as a columnist, as a blogger. But one question that I always ask all my guests is this. It's the Freedom Club podcast. And my question is, what does the word freedom mean to you?
Oh man, it's funny you should ask that because I think for about 11 years I worked in an IT department. And although I love the work, because I've always been a big tech guy, love my technology, love working in IT, the office itself had no windows and artificial lighting.
Oh,
And it could have been snowing, raining, or glorious sunshine for, that 9 to 5 time that I was in there. And I clearly remember when I started running my business as a side gig and waiting for that moment where I would bravely leap into the unknown. And it took me a long time to actually make the decision to go and do it, as I was balancing both worlds simultaneously. And I remember having this overwhelming feeling that I just wanted to be free, to get up in the morning, take my dog for a long walk, go for a run, go to the cinema on a rainy Wednesday afternoon if I wanted to, spend more time with my wife and family, or even book a dental appointment, on a Tuesday afternoon and not worry about having the time off. So I suppose freedom for me means many, many things, but ultimately it's about being able to do something that I love and just not live for the weekend, but live a full and exciting life every day. I mean, in the last 4 months, I feel so fortunate to have been to events where I met you in Denver. I went with Adobe to Vegas, a company called Marketing United. They had a big event in Nashville, and I've got San Francisco next week. But ultimately, I just feel so grateful for my life right now. And even now, and I'm enjoying this time that I've got, and after all the hard work and getting those rewards for doing just that, I'll never forget those days sat at my computer in that office with no windows, wishing and yearning for that freedom. But now I have it. I just want to look after it and work hard to ensure that I can continue to live that life on my terms, doing something that ultimately doesn't feel like work.
that's awesome. Yeah, and it's interesting that you talk about that, how you describe your office. When a lot of people describe their current workplace, if you didn't know what they were describing, you might think they're describing a prison, right? And I mean, in some cases, they even monitor your phone usage. You don't get out.
Yeah.
Do you get out for recess? No, I don't. And hopefully, I guess if you work well enough, someday you get out for good behavior. But that's wonderful that you made that transition, which is that journey is what this podcast is all about. And a lot of people are seeking work-life balance, and I prefer to talk about it as alignment between your work, your family, and yourself. So keeping that in mind, tell us a little bit. I want to get into what you do for the work part, but tell us a little bit about the family part. Now, you live in Birmingham, which here, we have Birmingham, which,
Yeah.
We pronounce things a little bit differently here. Some people here would call it, Tottenham instead of Tottenham. But let us, your family, where you live, and the non-work side of Neil Hughes.
The non-work. Well, one of the things of having your own business, of course, is everything is always work. Even if you sat on a plane or watching TV, you're always kind of working. But from a family point of view, I've got married to my wife, Kerry, got two beautiful stepdaughters, Kirsty and Keely, and also got a son, Louis, who's 17 years old, who refreshingly he keeps me on my toes and doesn't let my head get too big. And
that's impressive since you're only 23.
Yeah, I had a hard paper round, and I'm also a long-suffering Derby County fan. I don't know if you follow UK soccer at all, but they're my team. We're in the Championship. Maybe we'll scrape the playoffs this year and make it to the playoffs next season. Make it to the Premiership next season. But apart from that, I love my music. I love travel. I go to the Glastonbury Music Festival every year.
Nice.
And this year is going to be really, really hard because they have a fallow year to look after the farm and look after the cattle. So there's no Glastonbury Festival this year. And for anybody listening in the US that's never been, try and imagine it's the size of a city. I think it's something like 3,000 acres, and there's 1,000 acts playing over 3 days. And you could just completely lose yourself and lock yourself in this bubble of just music and some crazy sights and sounds. And I just absolutely love it. I am a tech guy, but I also love knowing when to put that tech down and just going off the grid, going rogue for a couple of days.
Just enjoying it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen some video footage from Glastonbury. It looks amazing. And, taking that journey to becoming an entrepreneur, I talk to so many entrepreneurs every week, either on LinkedIn or Instagram, or people who I coach or want me to coach them, or at conferences like the one we met at. And I'd say 90% of them have a dream of starting a podcast. And only a few of them end up going out and doing it. Right. And I had it on my list for probably 5 years to have a podcast, and I never did it. It was one of my New Year's resolutions. I finally did it. And then I met you and took it to the next level. But so in between, you left that job in which the office, no windows and very dark and dank, you escaped. You didn't go right into podcasting though, right? You were a columnist, a blogger. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, I kind of fell into everything by accident. So I was writing for a games website and helping run a video games website called This Is My Joystick, which I absolutely loved doing. And then I noticed that LinkedIn had introduced this new blogging feature. And there was two guys that really stood out for me. Well, probably three: Paul Drury, John White, who I know you know, and Dustin McKissin. And these guys were doing fantastic things with their content. They were creating blog posts about their world, their life, their work, their experience. And they were going on LinkedIn, and then LinkedIn were promoting these. And I think John White at the time had 500,000 views on his article, which just completely blew me away for a number of reasons, not just the amount of views he was getting, but also that you could see all the metrics were there for everybody to see. You could see how many people had seen it, how many people had liked it, how many people had commented on it. And I just thought it was a fantastic thing, because you've got experts from multiple industries and they're all coming together and discussing those big talking points. And it's only just been released, and I think you had to apply at the time to be featured on there or have the ability to post blog posts on LinkedIn. So I applied. A week later, I had access to the platform. And one of the big things that really annoyed me back then, and probably still does now, is the so-called guru, ninja, self-proclaimed Instagram expert with 84 followers on Instagram.
Right,
you know the kind.
Yeah.
So I did a post tackling that subject called, I think it was The Rise of the Social Media Ninja or Social Media Guru. And I thought nothing of it. I channeled my thoughts, got it out there. Woke up next morning and had so many notifications on my phone. I think there was 10,000 views overnight, hundreds of comments. And what had happened was LinkedIn had actually chose that post and promoted it on their social media channel. So essentially anyone on LinkedIn who followed the social media channel, which I think was about 6 million, that was on the front page of their LinkedIn profiles. It had tremendous engagement. And from that moment there was probably what completely changed my life, a combination of seeing John White's article, writing my own. From that point onwards, I thought, well, if I write 2 to 3 articles a week, that's quickly going to be over 100, 150 articles a year. So I set out writing about big talking points in the tech industry. And then I think it was 18 months later, a lot of my articles were featured in various channels on LinkedIn Pulse. So things like finance, education, technology, social media. And at the end, LinkedIn voted me the number 2 tech writer on the whole of LinkedIn, which completely is just insane, And from the back of that, I ended up with my own column on Inc. magazine. So all of a sudden, 18 months after writing that throwaway post on LinkedIn, I now find myself with my own column on Inc. magazine, over 1 million readers on LinkedIn. And I thought, this is fantastic. This is all great. But how am I going to engage with all these new readers? How can I reach out to them more? And one thing I didn't mention was when I first did that post on LinkedIn, I was so afraid of hitting that publish button because my finger was hovering over there and you're thinking, what are all my friends going to think? What my family, what my colleagues, what's my boss going to think? Who does he think he is writing this stuff on a professional platform?
Right.
So there's a certain element of fear there, which I'd overcome and got over 100 articles out there on LinkedIn. But then I thought, you know what? Why not do a podcast? So then I thought, let's do a podcast. But guess what? All those fears came right back again. I don't like the sound of my voice. I don't know how to edit. But I thought, no, let's just throw myself in there. And then I ended up doing the podcast, and things have just escalated from there over the last few months or maybe years.
And you recently hit a milestone with your 500th episode, right?
Yeah, 500 episodes, which I did end up ramping up the process. And I must admit, when I first started the podcast, I kind of fell into it again. I didn't really know what I wanted to achieve. Do I want a solo show, just me talking? Do I want to do an interview show? Do I want to mix it up? And I started out by interviewing, I think it was John White on episode 1, who was my inspiration that put me on this path in the first place.
Wow.
So that was a nod to him, really. And then I think Dustin, again, was a big inspiration. He was number 2. But then after that, I didn't get too many, there wasn't too many guests out there that I had access to. And then because I was writing for Inc. magazine, I was starting to get bombarded with a lot of PR people and people obviously wanting to be featured in the magazine, which I didn't want to go down that route. So I was just deleting all the emails one after another. And then I thought to myself, hang on a minute, you're missing a trick here, because a lot of those emails that were coming through were people at the very beginning of their startup journey. And all they wanted to do was have a leg up and maybe be able to share their story. And so I thought, well, maybe I could create a platform where they could share their story and everybody could share their story. And equally, everybody could learn from each other's story. And that's kind of how the podcast quickly began to take shape. And I think that wasn't until about episode 30. So I was about 30 episodes in that I really found my feet. And from there, I booked the guests in. I use Calendly, where I can just send somebody a link, they'll book the podcast in. But quickly I was finding that I was booked up 2 months in advance, which again, a great problem. So I then started recording 3 a week, then 5 a week. And currently I'm recording 6 a week and still booked up till June. So it's a great problem to have, but everyone wants to tell their story and share their story. And I enjoy doing that.
When you do you stockpile interviews, or do you you do an interview today and it'll air tomorrow, or are you like weeks ahead?
It depends because as a rule, I will book in 6 a week and say I'm not doing any more than 6 this week, and I'll split it out doing 1 a day. But if a great guest comes up, or something that really interests me, really excites me, or somebody wants to cash in a favor, I'll be like, oh, okay, I'll do you next week as well. And then some weeks I can end up getting 10 in a week.
Wow.
Quite easily. But, again, I enjoy it. And I think back to that guy sat at the desk with no windows and think, no, you're living the dream here. And also you're enabling somebody else to live their dream as well by getting their word out there.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned, there's so many people out there who they have it on their to-do list to start a podcast. And, they have some of the same fears that you had at the beginning. Well, I don't know how to edit this. I'm afraid of hitting the publish button. What's so-and-so going to say? It's got to be perfect instead of just good. What is the one thing you would tell someone who's been hemming and hawing and delaying on launching their podcast?
I would say, first of all, forget everything that you read on the internet, because you're going to go out there and you're going to be thinking, oh man, I need to learn how to use Audacity. I need to find out the right podcast host. I then need to spend $500 to $1,000 on mixing desks and microphones and this, that, and the other. No, it's all rubbish. A podcast essentially is a conversation, just like me and you are doing here. And the main equipment that we've both got is a microphone. I know you've got a fantastic microphone there, which is about $50, $60. Is that right, Kurt?
That's about right. Exactly. Yeah.
And it's a fantastic microphone. It really is. So all you need is a microphone and a voice, and then maybe something such as Zoom to record that call, or you can record your call on Skype. That is all you need to think about when recording a podcast. If you don't like editing, you can outsource that. If you don't want to set it all up or on the podcasting host, somebody else can take care of that. I mean, I do help a lot of people now go through that setup process. And one of the things that I've learned is some people want to be taught. They'll say, Neil, can you teach me how to use Audacity? Can you teach me how to set up my podcast and launch 8 episodes? I can do that, no problem. And other people are like, I don't care. I want to record that conversation. I want somebody else to do it. So it really can be as simple or as complicated as you want. But essentially, all you need is a microphone and a voice.
Yeah, I sat and stared at Audacity for about a half hour and said, forget it. And I was doing it on iMovie for a while, which people are like, how do you even do that? I'm like, well, you load an audio file and then you save it. I mean, and now I use Camtasia, which probably no one else uses Camtasia to do a podcast, but it's sound. I saved the file. I have an intro and outro. I had someone on Fiverr record, and I go from there. So like you said, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, and a lot of people try to make it a squiggly line and just never end up getting to that second point.
Yeah, absolutely. I do take a lot of it for granted because obviously after 500 episodes, I can edit in Audacity almost in my sleep. It's that sad. I can now spot an or a just from the appearance of the sound file without even listening to it. I can do it in my sleep, but I have some of the people I've tried to help. I've videoed myself doing that and saying, look, it's really easy. It's nothing to be afraid of. And they've just replied back with, no, you're okay. I want you to do it.
So shifting gears a little bit, tech. You live, breathe, eat, sleep the world of tech. Through your podcast, interviewing new people in the tech world, startup founders every day, writing in your column, blogging. Social media has been in the news. Well, social media has been in the news, for 15 years now. But specifically, two concerns. One is over privacy. The other is over, which you have written a lot about, AI, artificial intelligence, and the fears surrounding that. People still remember, 1984 and Skynet, the Terminator movie, and artificial intelligence, taking over. But when we talk about privacy, and specifically, Cambridge Analytica has been in the news recently for the Trump campaign, although having had an agency and knowing what they did, it's been going on for years. And so I sense some of that might be more political because there's a lot of other people doing a lot more that haven't, people haven't cracked down on. But where do you think, looking at social media and personal freedom and kind of that privacy aspect of it, I was having a discussion in the gym with someone. There was a personal trainer there and someone else. And we happened to be talking about, it was around the time, I think, of the NFL Combine. And so it was 40, they do the 40-yard dash time, and they measure your time to measure how fast you are. And we were having a discussion about 40-yard dash times from when we were in high school. I hadn't had a discussion about the 40-yard dash probably in 30 years. My cell phone was right next to me. It wasn't on. I mean, it was on, but I wasn't using it. I left the gym and went on, and the first ad I saw on Twitter was from Adidas, improve your 40-yard dash time. As soon as I grew my beard, I didn't write anything about my beard, but I think I posted a picture. I started seeing beard, advertisements for beard balm and beard oil. We have Alexa, and, Alexa's listening to us. There's a lot about, in terms of fear of the privacy, but there's also maybe something to be said about seeing more relevant ads that are relevant to your life and to everything. Where do you see kind of the tipping point between privacy and freedom? And is society going to say, all right, privacy is gone? Forget about it? Or where do you see that kind of headed?
Well, without getting too technical, one of the areas I'm really passionate about at the minute is blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Now, I don't know if you've heard anything about the Brave browser and the BAT token, which is Basic Attention Token, I think it stands for. Have you heard of that at all?
I have not, no.
So I think we can all agree at the moment that the advertising landscape doesn't work. You don't watch adverts on TV anymore. If there is any, you will end up recording or fast forwarding it. Online, you've got a pop-up blocker. So nobody's actually viewing adverts, and everyone's wanting to lock down their privacy now. I don't think they were too aware a few weeks ago, or they didn't even care, but now it's in the forefront of all our minds. So pretty much, there's a new browser come out. It's called the Brave browser. So much like Chrome, Safari, Internet Explorer, or Safari, it's a new browser. But what this essentially does, it blocks out all adverts. So there's not a single advert, not a single pop-up can appear on that browser. So then you're going to think, well, what about or the big companies, how they're going to get their money and their advertising revenue. And I think when they first announced what they were doing, the Dow Jones Media Group, which they publish things like the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, they were saying pretty much, if you mess with our advertising revenue, we're going to take you to court, we're going to sue you. But quite interesting, last week, they've now signed a deal with this Brave browser. So I can see almost a new landscape appearing. Now, what I should say is, yes, there's no adverts on this Brave browser. However, what there is, there's a little to watch adverts. So you, Kurt, could say, 7 o'clock on a Wednesday evening, I want to watch some adverts now. And when you watch those adverts, you're instantly rewarded with these tokens. And those tokens you can then distribute to, I don't know, other podcasters, YouTube providers, and people like that. And it creates like a whole new ecosystem where nobody's releasing their private information, nobody's watching ads, and ultimately the control is back in your hands. And I think that's a really interesting new approach. I don't know if it'll take off. I don't know if it'll be a big hit, but I would urge anyone just to look up this Brave browser and the BAT token and just how they're trying to do something completely different here. Because like you say, the current system doesn't work. And do you just surrender your privacy, or do you look at a new way of doing it, especially with the end of net neutrality on the horizon too?
Yeah, it's interesting. And before I was a coach, I was an advisor to an online media startup, and we were investigating non-advertising ways to generate revenue, and kind of almost looking at the micro subscriber model, where kind of like you do with Hulu. On Hulu you can pay if you don't want to see commercials. You pay a little bit more, but I think when free content started going out there, newspapers reacted and put up paywalls, but didn't do it correctly. I think that you might see more creative ways that some of these paywalls go up. Someone like Dow Jones and Wall Street Journal, it's a little more specialty than, say, like the New York Times, right?
Yeah.
But you might see that where, all right, pay $2 a month if you just want to see sports news. Kind of micro subscriber model, or like you said, pay almost like a token reward system, which is interesting.
An interesting thing with news as well, obviously, because the opinion of news is very subjective. So what you see, you're getting somebody else's interpretation of that news, and you could go away and get the exact same story, slightly different slant on it. But anyway, it doesn't have to be specifically from the New York Times, does it?
Right. And, on that note, one thing I started doing a couple of years ago, and I was someone who worked in politics for years, and so I lived and breathed the news. And one of the things that I learned, privacy aside, was that the more I looked at my Facebook feed, the more angry I got during the day. And the news almost had a hold on me. And so I did what Tim Ferriss calls is a low information diet, where I just stopped watching cable news. I stopped getting news. I still know everything that's going on because it still seeps in, but that kind of, I call it angry book. Like, what am I supposed to be angry about today on both sides of the aisle? Or it could be something about, Joe Smith didn't stand for the national anthem at the game, and now we got to all be angry at Joe Smith. Or he did stand, and now we got to be angry at Joe Smith. And, you have children. I have children. And that kind of hold that social media and even online news can get on you, for adults it does. And I think Facebook even has data that, they manipulate your emotions when you're on Facebook, when you're on the news feed. But for kids, whether you talk about kind of the bullying, cyberbullying, or even just kind of addiction to social media where your head is constantly down looking at it. Do you have concerns? You're in the tech world, but you're also a dad. For that.
Well, I tell you, it does concern. Have you seen Snappables? I think it's called. Have you seen that?
No.
So I think Snapchat announced it yesterday. So we've all seen people staring in their phone and you're thinking, what are they doing over there? They're just trying various filters on Snapchat with clothes and things like that on there. I can just about tolerate that, but I am a bit of a grumpy old man sometimes. And Snappables is taking it to another level. It's like an episode of Black Mirror. Basically, people in public are going to be staring into the screen on their phone, but controlling the game with their face muscles. So you're going to be looking at people nervously twitching and winking whilst looking at their phone in public. And I just can't help but think, come on, use tech for something more valuable.
Oh, man.
And another thing as well, I go to a lot of gigs, as I said, and the number of people that spend their night watching that gig that they've spent, I don't know, $70 for through the screen of their phone and recording the moment rather than living it. It's just quite tragic, isn't it? You know, if you don't document it, it never happened.
Well, that's exactly right. And even for adults, but I know it happens for kids as well, is that I know I do it and I have to pull away from it and just decide I'm making content for the love of making content and to help people, because it's easy to get obsessed, even if it's for an hour in, oh my gosh, this video only has 1,000 views over 2 hours. What is wrong? Why does LinkedIn hate me? Why does the world hate me? And no one likes me. And, I'm 43 years old and I have a pretty good attitude about it. And I still get that sense. But for kids who are 10, 12, 15, it can become demoralizing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm no saint. I'm conscious of doing it myself. And as you know, Kurt, LinkedIn group chat messages can take some managing on their own. But I think it's so important to know when you put that phone face down on the table and just be present in that moment. And like I said, I spend the majority of my time either typing an article on a laptop or recording a podcast. Even if I'm watching TV, that laptop will be on my lap there. And I love it. It's what I do. I don't consider it work. But you have to know when to put it down. And I think many people don't. And that's the part that saddens me. And very often, if you ignore the person in front of them, very often you see the people ignoring the person in front of them while they like photos of someone they don't even know. And it's just not right. But when it's used correctly, it can be a great tool.
And on that note, I mean, you talked about John White and the stats that you guys were getting on LinkedIn articles early on. And whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, the algorithms change, and one day they favor videos, the other day they favor text. One day they favor photos, now they favor photos without text, all this, right? LinkedIn has gone through a major change, right? Where articles, the reach has drastically reduced. Videos, they're pushing videos heavily, and then text posts were great. It's happened with Facebook. And I know people who are like, wow, they get so worked up about it. As a content producer who still consistently produces your content on podcasts, on LinkedIn articles, etc., what's your advice to someone who is very successful producing LinkedIn articles and they're getting 500,000 views, but then the algorithm changes? Because I know that gets demoralizing as well, especially if you're watching views and you're relying on it for your living and for your reach.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that's a lesson that I learned the hard way, because I was doing fantastic. The number 2 tech writer on the whole of LinkedIn, all my articles are featured, over 1 million views, everything's fantastic. But then essentially you're playing on somebody else's platform and that rug can be pulled away at any moment. And I know a lot of people have this exact same experience on Facebook where they've left their personal website behind, set up camp on Facebook. Again, the algorithm's tweaked. It's somebody else's playground. It's now pay to play. You've lost everything. So the one bit of advice I would give to anyone listening is never, ever have all your eggs in one particular basket. I lost it all. And I suppose really that's another reason I pivoted and started the podcast and went to Inc. magazine. And then now I'm writing at the Next Web. And even though I'm a tech guy, I'm now being pulled towards the world of marketing technology. So I'm writing for a marketing technology company. I'm getting invited to marketing technology events. So never be afraid to have your finger in lots of pies, spin lots of plates, and don't be heavily reliant on that, one platform. Because if it's somebody else's platform, those rules can change at any moment.
That's a great point. And so, Neil, thanks for being with us. This is the final question to kind of wrap it all up under the theme of freedom. You mentioned early on that you took that journey from that dark, dank, no windows office, right, into having a life of freedom where you had that alignment, right? Where you could go and walk your dog in the morning, go to a movie on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. And you interview a lot of entrepreneurs who have done the same thing. There are people out there who are sitting, listening to this podcast, and they're on their way to work, or they're sitting in an office that has no windows, wishing they could break out and do what you did. But fear is holding them back. What would you tell that person?
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I've considered myself very fortunate to have spoke to over 500 people. Now, the first thing that I've noticed is it really isn't about money, because a lot of people, your podcast here is all about freedom, and I applaud you for what you're doing here, because a lot of people want their own business and think, I just want to have all the money and not really work. It's not about that at all. And I spoke to, I think it was Andy Ory, who he was a former co-founder of Acme Packet, and his company was bought by Oracle for 2.1 billion.
Wow.
Then there's a guy called David Baggett. He was a co-founder of ITA Software, and his company was bought by Google for 730 million. And then there's a guy from Datto, I think his name was Austin McCord, and he turned down 100 million buyout for his company. Well, I think it was Microsoft came in, and that company is now worth over $1 billion. But the point here is, it isn't about money at all. These people go on to create other companies. And one thing that I've learned is it's not about having millions sitting in the bank and watching Netflix or sitting in that comfort zone of misery, as I've heard you talk about so many times. But essentially, we all need a purpose. We need a reason to get out of bed in the morning and once you've taken away the stress of worrying if your bills are going to be paid, that's a fantastic thing. But once you've done that, once you've traveled the world, then what? And I think people need to find their purpose or have something that excites them enough to get up in the morning. If you don't, that's your ultimate downfall. And fear is a big thing. And I think some people may quit their day job a little bit too soon. And equally, I was probably a little bit too cautious. And as we both listen to Gary Vaynerchuk, he always says, yeah, you finish work at 5 p.m. You don't get home till 6, 7 p.m. But then you do have 7 till midnight to build a side gig on the side. And if you really want it that bad, you will make it happen. And you'll build it on the side until such a point where is your nighttime job will overtake your day job. And then you make that leap. But ultimately, you've got to want it, and you've got to go out there and do it. And mate, if it's a problem that you want to solve, if it's something you want to fix, I don't know what it is, or you've got your passion, only you know what it is. But I've done it, and I know that you can too. I mean, one thing I would say as well that always made me smile is surround yourself with people that are on a similar journey to you. And they don't need to be people in your own life either. I've had tremendous support from John White and Sarah Elkins and so many others out there. But what I did find is I was listening to Gary Vaynerchuk on the train to the office, like many people that are sat at home now or sat on that train. And Gary Vaynerchuk would be saying, give jab, jab, right hook, which essentially means give, and then ask somebody for something. So I was listening to all this. I'm surrounded by all these people, and I'd arrive in the office and people would say to me, so you write articles on LinkedIn for no reward and you record podcasts for no reward. What you're doing, I can't be bothered to do things like that. Have a plan, create those little goals and know what you're heading for, and don't stray from that path is probably the best advice that I could offer.
That is a wonderful way to conclude the Freedom Club podcast. And Neil, you are a tech columnist, blogger, podcaster, world traveler, and of course, as you mentioned, and I will stress it, you help people create, edit, level up their podcasts as well. So for everyone listening, where can they find you? Where's the best place to go find Neil Hughes?
Well, I'm probably the easiest guy to Google, so you can find me there. But there is another tech writer called Neil Hughes, so go with Neil C. Hughes. But the safest way is getting me on Twitter at Neil C. Hughes. You can also get me, go to my website, which is techblogwriter.co.uk. You can find all about me there. And equally, if anyone listening is sat on that train going to work and just wanting somebody to talk to or bounce ideas off, feel free to send me a quick email, techblogwriter@outlook.com.
Neil Hughes, thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
You too. Really enjoyed being on here. Thanks, Kurt.
Thanks a lot, Neil.